14th to the 16th century Japan. You're on a humble fishing ship, sailing around the waters of coastal Japan. In an effort to make a day's wage of the catch, you stay later out on the waters. As day turns to night, you catch enough fish, and it's time to head back into shore. The calm seas slowly start to churn, and the waters go from tranquil to violent and turbulent. From the seas emerges a giant head and shoulders of a man, a spirit, a sea monk of Japanese legend. Both fascinating as it is frightening, the figure demands a barrel of the day's catch. You're not willing to take chances with a being of supernatural origin. You hand over a barrel, but it still wasn't good enough. Like many sailors before you, the figure smashes your boat to pieces. As your vessel sinks to the bottom of the ocean, you wonder what you could have done to anger such a deity. Today, on Unblurring the Unknown, we explore deep into the Japanese legend of the yokai known as Umibozu. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. I'm your host, Dominic. I just want to say happy belated Thanksgiving to everybody. And before we start today's episode, again, happy holidays for the next coming weeks. Happy belated Thanksgiving. Hope everybody had a fun, safe Thanksgiving. And for today's episode, I've decided to take kind of another U-turn on what I am used to putting out there for episodes. So this week, I have decided to, after doing some research, I found this topic. And now when I saw this topic online, it intrigued me. As someone who knows absolutely nothing about Japan in general, the idea of a giant sea monster / spirit kind of captivated my mind and inspired me to delve into this topic that I really don't have any knowledge on. Now, how today's episode is going to be laid out is that I'm going to talk about yokai and what yokai are, and then I'm going to talk about the Umibozu. What is the Umibozu? What's its history? Kind of how did it come to be? And then I will share sightings of the Umibozu and modern opinion and wrap it up with theories on what I personally think could be responsible for this legend / myth of Umibozu. Now, what's different between this is that Umibozu is not really a cryptid. It's not really anything that can be explained normally. Umibozu is really a myth, a folklore tale that's shared in Japan. And the reason that I wanted to share this topic specifically is that after doing some research, I felt like there's a little bit of truth behind some of these stories and some of these accounts. Like, there has to be something that explains the legend. Why did this legend exist? Is this a real entity, or is this something that is being misidentified, or is this something that we haven't fully explained? But I thoroughly believe that something is to be explained for this, because there's a lot of information on it, and there's a lot of tales on it, and we'll all get into that later. But that really captivated my mind to delve into this topic today, and I just wanted to clarify that this is kind of like a folklore / myth / legend type of an episode. So just kind of keep that in mind, that a lot of this, there's some of this that is based in fact, but I think there's also some of it that is based in fiction. So again, take this all with a grain of salt. I'm obviously going to share my opinions at the very end on how I think everything is going to shake out. Now, like I said, I'm going to start off by explaining what are yokai. Now, yokai are spirits and monsters of supernatural origin that come from Japanese folklore. Now, yokai can loosely be translated to monster, demon, or spirit, and yokai can kind of be up for interpretation as a whole. Japan has had a long history of embracing legends of the supernatural, transforming animals, gods, and all sorts of monsters. Japan is very big on all that stuff. So the idea of yokai is basically, it's very up for interpretation. It can mean a lot of different things. And through my research, it was kind of a very broad and loose definition that kind of explained a lot of things from supernatural origin. Now, again, the best definition for yokai, like I just mentioned, is that this is a term that basically encompasses all supernatural creatures and phenomenon that exist in the world according to Japanese tradition. Now, obviously, in the United States and other parts of the world, we don't really have this. I don't think we really have a term that describes or encompasses all supernatural phenomenon or all monsters or that sort of thing. But then again, I think Western society is very much kind of realistic in their monster stories. But then obviously you have like the internet generated monsters, which obviously that's fake and that's kind of folklore-ish myth type. So that also kind of fits into the idea of what Japanese were doing with the yokai. But again, I'm kind of getting off topic here. Now, the oldest stories of the yokai go back to the 8th century, and this is where the earliest written records started to emerge of the Japanese using them in their prehistory. Now, originally, these stories in ancient Japan depicted spirits as invisible to the human eye. But as culture grew in Japan, it became more common for these spirits to be depicted by artists of the time, and they also felt like it was important to give images and ideas of what these beings actually look like, rather than thinking that they're just invisible and they're just kind of ever present. We just don't know what they look like. So artists took the idea of depicting these spirits and strange monsters, and obviously all of this became more popular and stories became widespread. And then these pictures that artists created, they morphed into long scrolls of information containing stories of strange tales and encounters that people had with the unknown. And this is really where the idea started to take off of the yokai and the supernatural and the paranormal, and I guess you could say cryptids, strange monsters and things that people were seeing that they couldn't explain, and that was all being documented. Whether or not a big chunk of that was real or fake is kind of up for interpretation, but that is kind of remains a mystery, obviously. Now, as history went on, these stories gained a lot of popularity. Now, some of these stories took on a life of their own, and they blended with renditions of monsters that were created by artists of the time period. Now, because of the artists depicting the yokai that were real and people were seeing, and I loosely use the term real, when artists were depicting these yokai that people had seen and that these were, quote-unquote real, these artists also made fake yokai, basically making their own versions of monsters, because they were like, let's make our own monsters. Let's make these stories of our own monsters. So the fake monsters kind of blended with the real sightings and accounts of monsters or ghosts or the supernatural that people were seeing. So it kind of all blended together, and these stories of old blended with the stories of new. And these artists ended up creating large encyclopedias of stories and of accounts of creatures and supernatural spirits and things of the like. Now, some of these old stories are rooted in reality, as they are genuine accounts of things that people cannot explain. And then, like I mentioned, some of them being made up and some purely created from the imagination. But people consumed it. People loved this type of media. People took it and they ran with it and they loved it, and they loved this idea of it. And the stories of the yokai took off in fine art and in theater as its popularity increased. Now, eventually these stories died in popularity when Japan's culture turned towards modernization. But it has seen a revival within Japanese pop culture and literature. As of recently, it's obviously yokai have a very firm influence in a lot of anime and a lot of Japanese pop culture now. Whereas when Japan was starting to modernize, that wasn't really, like, oh, we don't want to talk about monsters and ghosts and demons and stuff like that. Excuse me. Whereas now they're very much embracing um, the roots of the yokai and where they came from, and obviously, like I mentioned, their presence is very firm in anime. I don't watch a whole lot of anime, but obviously people who do can obviously imagine that the idea of giants and demons and monsters and things of that nature are very prevalent in anime. Now that we've covered kind of what is a yokai, now what is the Umibozu? Now, the description of the Umibozu remains consistent. Its true form remains a mystery. However, it appears in the shape of a man, except only from the shoulders up, as the rest of its body is hidden from the ocean. It is all black in color, with large round eyes and no other facial features. Its head is smooth with no hair, and its size does vary but is always described as big as a ship. Now, the name Umibozu translates to sea monk, and there is a rumor as to why they are called this. Obviously, this comes into the kind of fact portion of this, or where the myth comes from. Now, many believe Umibozu are in fact spirits of drowned monks or priests, and because of the violent nature of their death, these drowned monks or priests turned into ghosts and spirits. And then that's why that they go out into the ocean and they haunt and attack vessels, basically getting their revenge for the people who had wronged them. Now, this description of them is very similar to another yokai, and I might butcher this name, so I do apologize if I do say anything incorrectly. I am terrible with pronunciations, especially when it comes to Japanese or Chinese things, so I might butcher this, and I do apologize. Now, like I said, the description of them is very similar, or this description is very similar to a yokai known as funuyurei, which are ghosts who died at sea, and they haunt vessels and people out of anger. Now, the funuyurei basically will appear on a vessel, cause a whole bunch of torment, they will move objects, they will attack and antagonize the crew members, and even sink vessels. That's the stories of the funuyurei. And if you know anything about ghosts of the paranormal, there's other cultures around the world with stories about ghosts who are, died out at sea, or people who died out at sea, and now they haunt the same ocean or same sections of ocean that where they passed away at. So this is not an unheard of concept. However, that is only one description of the Umibozu. Now, another description of the Umibozu makes it out to be more of a monster than a ghost. And these stories take a complete U-turn, and they describe it more as like a serpentine-like creature rather than the giant black figure of a ghost. Now, this kind of begs a question: is if the Umibozu actually exists in some form, what is it? Is it a ghost or a spirit, or rather a unidentified monster or a misidentified animal that we already know to science? That kind of remains the question that we don't fully understand. Now, the stories of Umibozu describe it as interacting with the crews of the boats in encounters that are very malevolent. It will whip up the seas from otherwise calm waters into vicious swells. According to legend, the Umibozu will either destroy vessels with a single blow targeted towards the hull of the boat, or demand a barrel from the crew. Now, the crew obviously giving the barrel as an offering, thinking that their lives will be spared, the Umibozu will use the barrel as a scoop of sorts to collect ocean water and dump it on the boat to drown them. Now, that's kind of morbid, to say the least. And now the only way, again, according to legend, to get away from the Umibozu is that to offer the giant a barrel with the bottom cut out from it. Now, the Umibozu will take the barrel and try and scoop up the ocean water to try and drown the people that gave it the barrel, and with no effect because the bottom of the barrel is cut out. So, while confused, this will give sailors time to make a hastily getaway away from the clutches of the Umibozu. Now, that is, of course, according to legend. Now, this is all legend, right? Is there any proof to any of this? Now, Umibozu is a widespread story and legend, unlike many other stories of yokai. Many yokai are regional, whereas the Umibozu seems more widespread, which kind of lends credit to the idea that there must be some sort of tangible thing or creature or spirit that is causing people to say that they see something they can't explain. In multiple regions of Japan, sailors have had stories that contain some sort of variation of a Umibozu that attacks ships, interrupts and antagonizes fishermen, and even flips boats as some sort of practical joke. And Japan isn't the only country with a story of an Umibozu. In China, they have stories of the Kikokuten, and in Mongolia, the Mokuri Kukuri, which also bears a resemblance to the stories of Umibozu in the Funuyurei, and even in Europe. Now, Europe's version of an Umibozu, or of a Kikokutan, or the Mokuri Kukuri, is known as the sea monk. Obviously, Umibozu translates to sea monk, so Europe has a unidentified creature that is known as the sea monk, and also known as the bishop fish. However, these were tangible creatures, and these were not giant ghosts. And to build off of this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the sea monk of European legend. And this legend was real. This legend actually happened, in that there is some basis to the existence of the sea monk and the bishop fish. Now, the sea monk in European legend and European tales was actually discovered off the coast of the Danish island of Zealand in 1546. Now, it was later documented in Conrad Gessner's book, Historia Animalium, and in this book, it referred to a sighting that predated its discovery in 1531. Now, the sea monk bears a lot of resemblance to that of a giant squid, and the theory was actually proposed by cryptozoologists that this was a giant squid, and there's also other theories and ideas that float around that this could be a angel shark or a monkfish. Obviously, no pun intended with the sea monk and the monkfish. But obviously, I will share a photo of the sea monk on my Instagram. That is where I send out all relevant pictures and photos from this episodes, so you folks don't have to hunt for them. You can go straight on my Instagram and find them. On my Instagram, I will post a picture of the sea monk from European legend and from European tales. And then I will also share photos of the angel shark and the monkfish. And I want you to take a look at those, and I want you to say, okay, those look very, very close and very similar to each other. So this lends to the idea that the sea monk and the bishop fish are real creatures that during this time period, especially during the 1500s, people didn't have an idea of what these were. These were unknown at the time, and people really couldn't describe what they were seeing. So obviously, the tales of a fish or a fish-like being gets exaggerated a little bit because people couldn't explain what they were seeing. If you've ever seen a monkfish before, and you can just go right up on Google and Google monkfish, monkfish are not very happy looking. They're very kind of flat and brown and gross, and they have a whole bunch of teeth. If you were in the 1500s and you saw one of those, you would be petrified because they do not look nice. They frankly look extremely gross and not welcoming whatsoever. So if you saw that, you'd be like, oh my god, that's a sea monster. What is that? So that kind of gives credence to the idea that the sea monk from European, basically, lore is a real creature, and that it is not an unexplainable thing that remains a mystery to science. Now that we've kind of talked about what the Umibozu is, and accounts of similar creatures, and that of the sort, let's get into some supposed sightings before we can get into kind of my personal theories on what I think could be responsible for the legend or the myth of the Umibozu. Now, the first sighting comes from a collection of writings from 1789 to 1801 called Kanzo Jigo. There was a report in this writing of Kanzo Jigo that an Umibozu rose out of the water and stayed visible for 3 days near Kaitsuka City. Now, our second sighting is in 1888. The Miyako Shinbun newspaper reported that an Umibozu sighting. Now, the thing is with a lot of these sightings obviously taking place, these first two taking place in the 1800s, there's not much more information other than that. And it's kind of, again, adds mystery to the idea of whether or not this is a real creature or a ghost or a spirit of some sort. Now, in another collection of writings called Uso Kanwa, and now this date was unknown. I couldn't find a date for when these writings were published. I couldn't find a date in the research I did. If someone is able to find a date, please let me know. I'm more than welcome to kind of correct myself there. In these writings, Uso Kanwa, they reported a sailor having an encounter with an Umibozu after he broke a fishing curfew and went out to sea anyways. Now, this sailor, obviously, during this time period of when Uso Kanwa was published, there was fishing curfews because townspeople and sailors of the like were afraid of the Umibozu, and they did not want to basically become victims of the Umibozu, capsizing their vessels when fishermen would go out at night. Now, the fisherman obviously broke the fishing curfew, went out to sea anyways, says, oh, the Umibozu does not exist, I'm going to defy the curfew, I'm going to go out in the water anyway. Now, obviously, the fisherman encountered an Umibozu, and what kind of is mysterious about this story is that the sailor reports the Umibozu actually speaking to him. And the Umibozu basically spoke to him and said, are you scared of me? Are you terrified of me? You came out here, so basically, you must be scared of me and stuff to that nature. Which the sailor, the fisherman, pretty much replied with, there's nothing scarier than the world we live in, which is kind of dark and kind of morbid. And when the sailor said this, it was reported that the Umibozu actually just kind of mysteriously vanished. Like, the sailor got all dark, morbid, and personal, and was like, there's nothing scarier than the world we live in. And the Umibozu was like, yeah, no, I should leave this guy alone, he's already sad enough. Which, interpret that story as you will. I don't know how credible I find that story, but that's neither here nor there. Now, and finally, most recently, in 1971, the Mainichi Shinbun newspaper reported a story from a fishing ship off the coast of New Zealand. Now, in this story, they reported that when the fishermen that were fishing off the coast of New Zealand went to hoist up their catch, they caught a giant animal that was tangled in the net. What they lugged up in the net was reportedly extremely large, brown in color with wrinkly skin, with large eyes and no nose and no mouth. Now, the fishermen said that the only part of its body was exposed, and only basically the top part of the body was exposed, and the rest of it was still underwater when they first pulled it up. Now, the fishermen said that this portion of the creature that was exposed from the water was roughly 1.5 meters in length, so that's 3 feet, 3.5 feet, so roughly 5 feet long, that length. So if that's the top or the head of the creature, then it was extremely large, whatever this was. Now, the story kind of ends right there, so from what I could find, I have to imagine that the fisherman caught the creature out of the net, let it go, but obviously the story kind of stops there, so that again is kind of a little odd and mysterious as to why the story stops there, and there's not more to the story. But again, that kind of seems consistent with the reports. It's just a little blurb like, hey, we saw it, and then there's like no other information to back up that you saw it, and it's like that doesn't really lend much credence to the fact that you even saw something. It just kind of sounds like you're saying, oh yeah, we saw something, and that was it. Like, you have to provide a little bit more of an explanation other than just saying that you saw something, frankly, especially for me to believe it, especially for the public to believe it. But I have to presume that they cut this creature that they could not explain out of the net. Now, obviously, Japan got word, obviously, because of the newspaper reporting it, and the Japan investigated the report, and they couldn't really figure out what it is, and obviously they basically crack this up to, oh, this is an Umibozu. Now, with that being said, that kind of brings us into theories as to what is the Umibozu. Is there any evidence that supports that the Umibozu even exists at all, or basically what is responsible for the legend of the Umibozu? Now, I have 3 theories for what the Umibozu could be, and my first one being real but explainable. I do not think that the Umibozu exists in the capacity that it is described in legend. I do not think it's a giant black silhouette of a giant that rises out of the water and smashes boats. I don't think that that's the case whatsoever. So that part of the legend I think is fake, and I think that it is made up to deter sailors and fishermen from going out at night, or for whatever reason that they made that part of the legend up. Why I'm putting this in as a theory as real but explainable is that the Umibozu could be a sea creature that people of the time didn't fully understand, and basically chalked this up to the idea that this was a monster. Now, obviously, they could also be using the Umibozu as basically a face to the name of the idea of how dangerous the seas can be, and obviously sea monsters having basically stories from all around the world. And I talked about it before on my Gloucester Sea Serpent episode, of basically somebody describing the Gloucester Sea Serpent much as not a monster in and of itself, but rather a metaphor to why the seas are so dangerous, and how the seas can claim people just by weather, freak accident, rogue waves, and things of the nature. I think that also could be kind of explainable for the Umibozu, and that the Umibozu basically is the scapegoat as to why sailors go missing, or why, fishermen go out and they are never seen or heard from again. And that they created the Umibozu as a way to explain what they could not explain by, sailors or fishermen unexplainably dying during this time period. Now, my second theory being that the Umibozu is not real, and this is strictly made up. It's made up for laughs. It's made up for whatever reason. It's strictly made up. The Umibozu does not exist. And again, this theory is kind of like, okay, it's a myth, it's a legend, it's made up. I mean, considering there's other yokai that have been made up by artists before, I think I could believe that this is made up. However, I think that there's a lot of different cultures and regions around Japan that say that they have seen something in the capacity of an Umibozu, and I think that kind of adds a little cloudiness to the idea that this is just a complete hoax and a complete fake story. Now, the third theory being that this is some type of ghost or paranormal entity. As I mentioned before, it is not unheard of for ghosts and things of the nature to haunt vessels and haunt boats and things of that nature. Do I think a paranormal entity could take the form of a giant black silhouette that rises out of the water? No. So, I don't believe that. So, I kind of believe more the idea of the Funuyurei, that, ghosts drowned out at sea or whatever happened to them out at sea, and now they haunt the vessels. So the idea of the Funuyurei, I think, is very plausible. The idea of the Umibozu basically rising up out of the water and smashing boats and basically saying, give me a barrel, and then drowns people with the barrel. I think that part of the story, again, is not true, and I think it is. I think that part of it's made up. So do I think that it could be some type of paranormal entity? I think in the fashion that reports describe it, I don't think so. If the Umibozu presents itself in a way that's more of a ghost or a specter or a poltergeist type of an entity that is more realistic in size, then maybe that could be a plausible explanation as to why the Umibozu is real. So my personal theory, obviously going over these three, is that the Umibozu, I think, is a It is real to an extent, in that some sightings are real living animals that people could not identify, and people chalked it up to the old sea monster legend of, we have no idea what's out there in the water, and so on and so forth. But I also think the Umibozu, like I mentioned previously, could be a metaphor. It could be a metaphor for the dangers of the ocean, or it could be a metaphor for the unknown of the ocean, and going out and into something when you're not prepared, and basically becoming victim to the forces of nature. Now, obviously, during this time period, and this is what I'm going to propose as a possible idea as to what could be behind the Umibozu legend, and this goes into my personal theories. During this time period, and during this time period in Japan, there is no possible way that sailors or fishermen of this time period had any idea what a rogue wave was. I mean, it wasn't until fairly recently ago until science basically came up with the idea of the existence of rogue waves. And if you don't know what a rogue wave is, it's pretty much when the ocean creates this giant wave of water on an otherwise calm, flat, tranquil day, and they're very unpredictable. They can happen at any particular time. Rogue waves have been attributed to as a possible explanation as to why the Bermuda Triangle has so many disappearances, in that when you try to explain the Bermuda Triangle, that this area for some reason has a high influx of rogue waves. That is one of those possible explanations that gets brought up in that conversation. But during this time period, sailors and fishermen and even townspeople of Japan would have no idea what a rogue wave is. And the idea of being out in tranquil waters and then obviously everything whipping up in a moment and then capsizing your boat and the waters going from tranquil and calm to immediately turbulent and a rogue wave coming in and just wrecking your boat entirely kind of matches up a little bit. However, I think, again, the Umibozu could have been created as a way to explain rogue waves, or explain, like I said, the disappearance of sailors and fishermen of the like. Now, I'm a big fan of that theory. I like that theory. I think that's one of the more explainable theories that I've come up with. And obviously this topic was a little bit out there in terms of what I researched before, but I wanted to do something a little bit differently this week. I wanted to go a little bit outside of the box, and I hope next week that I can kind of take another U-turn and find a topic and just consistently kind of change the topics for you, keep them fresh so you not get tired of aliens or cryptids or anything like that. So, with that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode on the Umibozu. Let me know if you like it. I took kind of a shot in the dark with this, looking up kind of a myth or a legend story. So if you did like it, please let me know. And if you want me to do more of these, just let me know. Leave a comment down in the comments section. You can email me. Let me know what you think. If you have any other sort of comments, again, Spotify, YouTube, you can leave your comments right there. And just before I leave you for the day, I already did my plug about Instagram, but I will say it again. You can go and follow me on Instagram at Unblurring the Unknown. You will see all the pictures and photos relevant to today's episode on my Instagram. If you are listening to this on Spotify, I also have YouTube. It is also Unblurring the Unknown. And if you are listening to this on YouTube, I am also on Spotify. So make sure if you are listening on YouTube and you want to go follow me on Spotify and be like, oh wow, I'm on Spotify all the time. Let me go listen to it on Spotify instead of opening up YouTube every day. Then you can go to Spotify, turn on the post notifications so you get notified every time I post a new episode. It helps me out. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for your continued support. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. And if you have any topic suggestions and you want to help me out, you want to make my job easier, please send me those topic suggestions at unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. I will say that again. unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. You can send me all those topic suggestions. Like I said, helps me plan stuff out. I hope to take another different turn this coming week, so stay tuned for that. But with that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode on the Umibozu. So, thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next one.